Welcome back to Brazil Crypto Report. Today I'm joined by Daniel Lynch, who heads LATAM initiatives at Consensys. We discuss why Brazil is such a key market for Consensys and dive into the popularity of products like Metamask and Metamask Institutional in the region. Great. So we're here today with Daniel from Consensys. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hey, Aaron. Thanks for the invite. Really happy to be here.
Amazing. Glad to have you on board here. I know we've been talking about this for a while, so glad to finally get this arranged. To get started, let's just dive in. Who are you? What's your professional background? And then we'd love to kind of dive into what Consensys is.
Hey, yeah. How you doing? I am Daniel Lynch. I lead two kind of initiatives here in Consensys. I'm in charge of our Metamask Institutional businesses partnerships, as well as for Consensys initiatives broadly in Latin America. I've been at Consensys a little over 2 years. I've been in these roles for a while. Previously, I was also responsible for our financial institution segment, so working with the likes of MasterCard, JP Morgan, et cetera. Before that, I was at Swift. Now, I know you're in Brazil, so I am talking about the global financial network, not the meat delivery company that is prominent in Brazil. But I was there for about 7 years, had a few roles, but about the last half of it, I was responsible for a lot of our payments innovation initiatives. Additionally, before that, I worked in supply chain software a little, and I got into the blockchain world really at my earliest stage. In 2012, I went to a wedding in Staten Island. I live here in New York. And I had a friend from Microsoft who was telling me I had to get more into Bitcoin, which I'd mildly heard of. I bought a few, I researched it. My interest was piqued. I had a novice or a mild level of interest in Bitcoin. I had a little price app on my phone that I would check maybe daily. I would read the news sometimes if there was a Mt. Gox or a Silk Road like story. I found it interesting, but not like absolutely compelling in the sense that I was a true believer. But in 2015, as I noted, I had been working at Swift. Previous to that, I'd worked in like supply chain finance a bit. So having worked in like payments, security, settlement, and reconciliation, supply chain, I one Thursday, I think, went to a workshop that was hosted by Consensys, and I want to say BlackRock, on Solidity. And I was blown away. This was probably, I think, November of 2015 with the Ethereum ecosystem. And I progressively became more and more of a true believer in Ethereum and that entire ecosystem. And over a few years at Swift was pushing us to do more and more things with Consensys, with Ethereum. And eventually, in 2021, I made the move over to Consensys. After almost doing it a few times in the past, I decided it was time to dedicate the entirety of my work life to this, and couldn't be more pleased.
Very cool. And then so why Consensys? I guess in 2021, there was sort of a plethora of opportunities across crypto and Web3. That was sort of the boom years when everyone was hiring. Like, why? I mean, do you really want to focus in on the Ethereum ecosystem?
Yeah, well, I mean, Consensys broadly is a company that does embrace like a multi-chain future, contrary to what some of the perception may be. We're very deeply involved in a number of initiatives, both with EVM and non-EVM chains. We've worked extensively with a number of these protocols. If you look at those that are available on like Infura, for instance, or natively in MetaMask, things like Avalanche and Binance Smart Chain, and having worked with all the layer twos. Additionally, with Metamask Snaps, which maybe we'll have time to talk about later, we are moving to a world where MetaMask will be able to seamlessly work with things like Bitcoin, Solana, Polkadot, et cetera. So just to dispel the notion that we're totally Ethereum focused for a moment, we do, I think, invest an inordinate amount of time, or not inordinate, an appropriate amount of time in ensuring the success of the Ethereum ecosystem. And really just, I chose Consensys because, frankly, as I noted before, I'd almost joined in like 2018, 2019. A number of friends were here. I have just been incredibly impressed with the kind of dedication that Consensys has to uplifting the ecosystem, to ensuring that there is success for users, companies, and developers. Is like these three different categories where they invest, I think, thoughtfully across all three. And then, of course, I think Consensys has always been, a body for like responsible innovation in the space, really looking at like inclusion, UX, real world use cases since day one. So as I mentioned, I almost joined in 2018, 2019 a few times. It was always my place if I was going to leave Swift, if I was going to jump over there. And without casting aspersions on any other of the company, I think there's a number of amazing companies and protocols that do incredible work here. But for me, there was no question. The home of MetaMask, of Infura, of now Lenia, a lot of exciting initiatives in the past. That's been here since day one, really kind of seeding the ecosystem. I think Consensys was a quite easy choice for me.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I've always had a lot of respect for Joe Lubin, the founder of Consensys, since I think I first met him in maybe 2016 or 2017, and it had interactions with him in various seasons over the years, and I've always just found him to be like, he's kind of like a true missionary, right? Like there's a lot of other kind of less painful things he could be doing with his life than trying to build this stuff, right? Like he'd probably be on a yacht somewhere living pretty good if he wanted to be, but he strikes me as just like a true believer, true missionary. Love him or hate him, like you got to give him praise for his dedication. So maybe let's talk briefly about just maybe actually before we dive into the specifics of Consensys and kind of your product offerings and whatnot, let's dive into a survey that you guys commissioned earlier this year. I'm going to share my screen here, so for those of you watching on video, we'll walk through this. But basically, you guys did a survey of kind of global crypto, kind of survey of attitudes, perceptions across a number of markets. And one of the markets you focused on was Brazil. So you did a bit of a deep dive here, surveyed about 1,000 people between ages of 18 and 65 earlier this year, 2023. And wondering if you could maybe just kind of give us like a high level, like what were the big takeaways? What are the big learnings from this?
Yeah, certainly. And I would encourage any of the listeners to go ahead and check it out. I think, we're super proud of the work we did here. We partnered with YouGov, if you know, they're a very prominent polling firm. They have participated in everything from presidential down to like municipal elections in the US and other countries, as well as a lot of interesting like issue polling and demographic studies. We did what we think is kind of a first of our kind global survey across kind of two verticals. So in one sense, we wanted to get people's familiarity with explicitly Web3 concepts. So like, have they bought a cryptocurrency? Do they understand it? Do they understand NFTs, Web3, DeFi, etc.? But then also we wanted, as a second line of questioning, to really evaluate, I would say, like the fundamentals of not just, does token go up, but like, what is the architecture of a better, newer internet? And as Web3 adoption happens, how can we really improve upon some of these major issues that these folks have seen? So we really got deeply into concepts of like privacy, compensation, and ownership, not just in the explicitly Web3 sense, but also how people feel about their interactions with like social networks, messaging platforms, different blogging platforms, places, micro-blogging platforms, which I guess is ultimately social media now. But, how they feel about their participation there, their agency, their identity, and their privacy. And we did this really in order to do what we launched a rebrand recently, really not essentially a very big shift in our product strategy, but in the way that we communicated it. We wanted to really reorient folks around. We've always been very, I think, dedicated to creating amazing tools for developers. I mean, anyone who's used Truffle or, there's this like free Infura tiers. We've been helping these folks out for ages. We have the diligence audits, which is probably like the world's largest, most respected smart contract audit service. But, when we talk about builders, we did want to make the concept a little bit more inclusive, not just to be oriented around developers, but also like, if you're an artist, if you're like an influencer with a YouTube channel, if you're just a person posting to like social media, we wanted to give folks like the framing to think that, in many senses, they're builders of the internet as well. And in Web3, they can be builders without, necessarily writing, Solidity code, but also contributing to this ecosystem. Again, whether they're staking, creating an NFT, and artists doing a token gated experience. We want to invite those folks to think of themselves as builders, which is a big part of like why we frame this along kind of explicitly Web3 concepts, but as well as dissatisfaction with Web2. And yeah, I mean, I could talk a little bit about the results if you want, specifically for Brazil, especially.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple slides here that kind of caught my attention that I'd like to go into. I mean, I think the first one here is, okay, everyone has heard of cryptocurrency. Pretty much all Brazilians had heard of cryptocurrencies, which maybe in 2023, that's not like really that abnormal of a thing in any market. But I did find some of these barriers to entry to be kind of interesting. One just being like, the market's too volatile, too risky, too many scams, don't know where to start. And some of this, I mean, all these make sense. Like, there's nothing here that's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's in there. But part of me, when I read this, I'm like, well, it's 2023. Like, these seem like the same type of criticisms that if you ran this survey in 2013, like, we would have had these same results, basically. And just kind of wondering, like, what's your take on this kind of barriers to access question here, specifically in the Brazil ecosystem? Because Brazil in particular has done a pretty good job of building different on-ramps through regulated, trusted platforms, like some of the fintechs and the banks and things. There's quite a few number of relatively good actor exchanges here that people can enter through. But just kind of curious as to what your reaction was on this particular question.
Surely. So maybe if I can answer this three ways. I mean, first, just to reiterate some of the Brazil results. Secondly, to talk about what we're doing for some of those challenges. And then
Sure.
three, maybe a little bit of the paradigm shift that I'm kind of talking about with this survey and what we're trying to induce in users or builders. They're no longer users. Everyone's a builder. But number one, I would say along the results, although you might not be surprised that 98% of people had like heard of cryptocurrency or whatever, I do think that Brazil did have some somewhat exceptional results. Like the 98% of folks that were aware of it was marginally higher than other countries. But I will note that there also was a question about whether folks thought that they truly understood kind of blockchain and Web3. And that number grew in 2022 to 2023 in Brazil from 41 to 59%. So really a 50% growth, crossing into a full majority of folks within the country. So I think that is certainly an advance that happened over that year. If it happens again at the same pace this year, we will be at 90% of Brazilians, but let's see. There was also very interesting across both being aware of cryptocurrencies and also positing that they really understand kind of Web3. Brazil was unique as a country with gender parity, which I think is very important. Results across like male and female respondents were remarkably close, which is really interesting. And then, of course, Brazil was one of our highest countries for folks that had responded that they had in fact purchased these type of assets. 41% had owned cryptocurrencies at one point, and 46% said that they planned on investing over the next year. So despite, general awareness globally, I think Brazil did have some really interesting results there. To your question about what we can do better, three things we're doing, I think, are going to aid the current kind of perceptions and issues people have. But then also, I would like that people totally change their perception and interaction with Web3. And I'll talk about both those things briefly. Number one is, in terms of addressing the current issues, we really see three verticals here within MetaMask. And I think, or within Consensys, but like MetaMask particularly is really our gate to retail. I mean, most Infura users are not novices, right? They're like building dApps and stuff, right? And MetaMask Institutional is obviously for like funds and builders and exchanges. But when we talk about folks that are really taking those first steps, the three issues that we find consistently are like education, UX, and security, right? At every step of the way. So like folks, whether they don't understand like the concepts of Web3, understanding the management of private keys or secret recovery phrases can be tough. What are they actually investing in? What are they buying? What are the mechanics for things like bridging or swapping assets? We are trying to address this we've always been really free with like sharing materials. If you ever look on our website, you'll find that we have like an abundant source of like blogs and free research that we do. We have a huge research team that is like weekly publishing tokenomics reports, things on L2s, what is ZK, etc. We wanted to really create a more curated experience though for like total novices. So if any of your users, they're probably not in need of this type of education, but if they got a cousin or a friend who needs to learn, I would implore them to go to learn.metamask.io. We launched it this spring. It's Metamask Learn, which is essentially a learning platform where there's all kinds of cool text and videos and demonstrations of how to do Web3 primitives like buying an NFT, swapping an asset, sending a remittance. But more importantly, there's actually kind of like a test MetaMask instance within it. So you can actually do all these things in a no stress environment. So if you want to practice sending like 100 USDC to your mom before you actually do it with real assets, you can do that. If you want to practice, using a MetaMask swap, if you want to practice signing into a platform using MetaMask, you can do all that. It's also available in I think 15 languages now. Portuguese was definitely one of the ones we first launched with, along with Spanish. But yeah, in addition to all of these core concepts, you'll find in each of them, there's actually a simulation of MetaMask. So you can step through those processes and really feel like you are enabled before you're out there doing it with your real keys and your real assets. So we're really quite proud of this platform. We've seen tremendous usage, especially in Latin America. So we are quite happy that we're helping people kind of walk through this. We have dozens of modules for beginners and kind of intermediate. We're going to start to do some more advanced ones around things like gas management or account abstraction, as well as looking at some collaborations. So maybe working with some larger protocols and apps to really give users that next level of education. Beyond education, I had said that security and UX are also important. On the UX side, we're super focused over the past year on making this, there are a lot of centralized exchange experiences. I think there's been excellent work done, particularly in LATAM. I'm a big friend of the folks from Bitso and Mercado Bitcoin and Ripio, love them all. For the folks that are controlling their own keys, or the folks who want the breadth of things that you can do with MetaMask, we've always been focused on that breadth that you can do anything in Web3. But the past year and a half, we've also been thinking extensively about how you can do it easily. So if you look at portfolio.metamask.io, if you've seen this before, is a dApp that we've created that really allows you to visualize all the assets within your MetaMask wallet. You can sign into it. You can also just load random addresses if you're ever curious to take a look at someone else's. But it will allow you to, it perceives all of your assets, tokens, NFTs, etc., such that you can more easily manage them. But then additionally, if you see on the left-hand side here, we have a number of primitives that make it incredibly easy for folks to do things like swapping, bridging, staking, etc. So these are our, famous aggregators. MetaMask Swaps is very popular for aggregating all of the automated market makers and dexes to make it very easy to have a high execution, low cost swap. We've extended that kind of idea out to staking. Bridging, I think particularly, is something that is very alienating for new users. Even let's say
where all the hacks
and
happen,
advanced
right?
users. Yeah. So we do I think an excellent job of auditing bridge providers and making it very easy for you to bridge across multiple networks in a very simple and intuitive way. And we're going to keep building on this MetaMask portfolio experience. So that's part of our initiatives around UX. We have a second kind of UX initiative any day now. I can't say exactly when. MetaMask Snaps are going to go live. So you may have heard of these. They've been live in test for developers for about a year and a half. MetaMask Snaps is basically a way for folks to design third-party extensions of the capabilities of MetaMask. So you can think of it as kind of like an app store for MetaMask. So you can really do virtually arbitrarily anything with Snaps, right? So folks have created ones that make it easier to use MetaMask with social media applications. Folks have done things around privacy and key management. A very popular one is we have a lot of security snaps coming out, wherein if you think there's something wrong, if you've signed the wrong transaction, there's kind of an escape hatch you can click that'll quickly transfer all your assets to another wallet to protect them. And then I think most top of mind for a lot of crypto people, although I'm very excited because, as I mentioned, Snaps can do arbitrarily anything, is that many folks are excited that there will be network support for a number of non-EVM networks. So there are already snaps in the works for, again, Bitcoin, Solana, etc. So within a month or two, you'll be able to really do to interact with any network using MetaMask. These snaps will go live very shortly. I can't say when, but keep your eyes on the news. And at first, there will be all ones that we've audited, so you can feel a lot of assurance and security using them. But we do want to move to a model where there is just kind of like an app store like model with like a directory where you can really have permissionless innovation there. So that's UX. And then lastly, for security, we are working with a lot of great providers where you can opt in to have, just better contract and fraud analysis in your wallet. So you may have seen like OpenSea and Blockade have collaborated together to have a way of preventing like malicious transactions where you get alerts within MetaMask before confirming your transactions. So we're doing some native integrations there into MetaMask, but then the snaps, as I mentioned, will enable folks to, much as you choose between like Norton antivirus and I don't know, another Defender or whatever that you may have on your computer, you will be able to choose from like a series of best-in-class snaps providers. So sorry, that was pretty long, but the three things are, again, really, security, UX, and usability and education. And then lastly, I would say just the last thing around perception, that paradigm changes, as more and more people start doing really, truly useful things in Web3. I do note in Latin America, we see a ton of remittance volume, folks using MetaMask. I know Bitso has a very, I think, successful business. I think that's a very useful case. It's semi-financial, it's remittances. It's not really investment per se, right? But it is a real everyday, headache for people. Remittance fees are ridiculous at like 7% in a lot of traditional folks. I would like to see that really start to extend into non-financial applications. So when you think about folks like XMTP who are doing decentralized messaging, if you look at Lens and folks trying to do like decentralized social networks, now that we have layer twos like Linea and Base and Optimism and Arbitrum that can support these volumes, I think the perception of Web3 being a place for scams will be, even though we're doing amazing work with UX and security and education, I don't think folks are going to feel particularly that it's like a dangerous zone to do messaging, like when you message with your mom on WhatsApp, right? Like I want that to be also a Web3 experience. I want like the way that people feel about posting like Twitter to be like posting to Lens or something like that, such that, the breadth of activities that people do in Web3 are like inherently, the obviously, again, remittances, the innovation we can bring in kind of the traditional FI world, things that are happening in DeFi financial applications are obviously super important to us, but I would like to see it become a much lesser proportion of people's activities, wherein Web3 is more like a democratizing agent, a thing that allows you like agency over your data. And I think that will also contribute to, that change in perception. Sorry, that was very long-winded, but those are the three, the what we're doing. And then also I think kind of like the entire paradigm shift in the industry.
Yeah. And that's really well articulated. So I appreciate that, even though, maybe a little bit long-winded, but this is all good information, like key points. And I think this is very much like the time that the industry needs to kind of like have this sort of reframe of like, okay, what are we all actually doing here? And what's the purpose of all this? Aside from just speculation or whatever, and it's really impressive to see what the MetaMask team has built on just the product front. I mean, I remember opening my first MetaMask wallet. I don't even know when. It was just like, oh my gosh, like, do I really feel comfortable like keeping my ETH in this thing? And now it's like I didn't even know you guys had the portfolio application. I mean, so it's like almost like there was these other like Zapperfy or Zerion, these other types of kind of portfolio aggregator type of things. And you guys have basically reproduced or produced like a version that basically kind of aggregates your entire portfolio, allows you to see everything, allows you to kind of manage all your trades and swaps and everything in one place, which is super cool. So I wasn't even aware of that. So that was super cool. And the MetaMask Learn is also really good too. I've used that a few times just to showcase to people who have some questions about basic things. I think you guys did a good job on that. So nicely done. And having it in multiple languages is also like pretty killer as well. So maybe let's talk a bit more about the kind of the consensus, I mean, do you guys still call it the consensus mesh? I don't know if that's like old terminology or not, but like the consensus ecosystems, like your suite of products and services, and kind of what the play in Latin America and specifically Brazil is for these. I know Brazil is one of your largest accounts for just MetaMask users, MetaMask retail MetaMask wallets, but it's also becoming a pretty big market for your MetaMask institutional platform as well. So would love to get some color around just like the MetaMask retail adoption, and then maybe take some time to explain what MetaMask institutional is and kind of what type of adoption you're seeing in Latin America with that.
Surely, yeah. So at Consensys, I mean, again, we're focused really around, I think in a unique way, that our customer base is very much, I think, like a 360 view of everything that happens here. And our product strategy really reflects that, right? So we always want to support like retail people, regular people, to access Web3. We do want to help developers. So we have a series of developer tools, whether it's the MetaMask SDK and Fura, some of our like fuzzing or diligence audits, as well as, with like Linea, we want to really have a best in class type 2 ZK EVM layer 2. And then additionally, we do work with like enterprise directly. That's where I think MetaMask Institutional comes in, which is a version of MetaMask that maintains complete parity with MetaMask. So if you can do it with MetaMask, you can do it with MetaMask Institutional. So the whole world of Web3 is at your fingertips. But with this, incredible reach, we did want to layer in a number of different capabilities that are appropriate to an institution. So integration with third-party custodians and custody tech. So whether it's like Fireblocks or BitGo or Credo or Liminal or Parfine or Kobo or Safe or HexTrust, we have a number of custodians with different models. Some are qualified custodians, some are MPC tech. You can create a vault there with a different like approval processes. So 2 out of 3 approvers or 3 out of 4. You can whitelist a protocol or an address or an asset or have a value limit. That wallet will propagate into MetaMask, so you can initiate any trades you want there, but maintain those controls on the side of the custodian. We also have some pretty advanced portfolio management, I think a little bit beyond what we have in the portfolio DApp, because the investigation or the investments of some of these actors gets quite exotic and sophisticated. We also work on integrating I talked about how we integrate custodians, but I think of MetaMask Institutional is kind of like a Swift for Web3, where a number of different parties can integrate together. Like in the traditional financial world, like if you want to buy and sell stocks, secretly behind the scenes, there are like investment managers, there's broker dealers, there's custodians, there's exchanges, there's CSDs, there's all kinds of actors. And they all integrate through single windows like Swift. If they all did one-off integrations with each other, you wouldn't be able to buy a stock or a bond. So much like I mentioned, we integrate all those custodians. We also integrate, for instance, like staking service providers. So if you want to stake with someone like Kiln or Allnodes or Blockdaemon, we integrate all of them. As well as we're looking into like risk providers, so like compliance providers perhaps, or like contract risk providers, such that they can all interplay together within MetaMask Institutional and across all these protocols. So we're quite pleased with the product and its success. We got hundreds of customers. I forgot to mention, very important, we also have reporting, which is very important for a lot of these institutions. I think the success of MMI, which has also had a lot of success in Brazil, is kind of indicative of like where we see a bit of the market. So we work with 6 types, I would say, of institutional customers, and we've had relative amounts of success with each. Particularly in Brazil, I can name like a customer from each of these profiles, which I think is quite interesting. Obviously, you got the crypto funds, like the crypto native funds. They exist to, participate in DeFi. We have a ton of them. We're starting to see more and more. In the US, we saw a bit for a number of years, but in Brazil, particularly as kind of the regulatory environment becomes more clear with some of the landmark legislation that's been passed, we're starting to see more and more hedge funds, family offices, traditional funds that may be deploying 0.5%, 1% of their portfolio, but they do want to get in not just tokens, but actual participation in DeFi. We have a number of VCs, obviously, who use us because, they can do very varied types of token allotments and stuff within MetaMask Institutional. We have a lot of DAOs and foundations. Obviously, they have to sit on a number of their own tokens and manage them. And I think very interestingly, the last 2 types of categories I would call kind of like builders. And in Brazil, we've had a ton of success with this. And I think this is a testament to how mature Brazil is becoming, is we have a number of exchanges, fintechs, banks, and neobanks that use MetaMask Institutional to kind of create like structured products for their customers. So imagine like maybe if all your customers understand what USDC is, they understand what Aave is, they would like to put USDC into Aave. But it'd be great if they did with MetaMask. I salute them if they use MetaMask. But it could be that like if you are, like a lower income person, you just want to save $7 a week, the complexity of doing that and the gas management could be a little tough. Whereas maybe your exchange could say, hey, we have a USDC Aave product It's very transparent. You're buying USDC, it's going into Aave, but they can like minimize the cost because they can aggregate like a book of orders from like 100 customers instead of you having to pay gas on the $7 each time. We actually have a customer in a Latin American country doing things like that right now. We're very excited about, and we're talking to a number of our Brazilian users about it, whether it's like staking or DeFi, or maybe even letting people like have like a voting tool if they want to vote, if they own like Maker or other tokens. So we see that a lot across exchanges, neobanks, fintechs, and exchanges, neobanks, fintechs, and banks, which is very interesting in Brazil. There's now banks, like not neobanks, but traditional banks. I really got to salute BTG for all the work they've done, even going back to 2017 to be active in the space. So we're really excited about that. And then the last category of MMI user, which I also think is quite interesting for Brazil, is we work with a lot of like brands that are not necessarily like investing or anything or creating like financial products for customers, but they are doing interesting things with like digital collectibles. So when you think about like, you know, if it's like a collection of NFTs, like sometimes when you buy, you participate in the mint or whatever, like on OpenSea, that's not really the way it's necessarily going to work when it's like loyalty schemes or like tickets, right? Those essentially just have a supply chain, right? So like a brand will mint, like let's say a concert in Brazil, maybe you with some of the tickets have like token gated backstage access. They'll probably mint all those in advance and have like an inventory of them and then distribute them as folks buy them because they can do different cool things with like gas subsidization. So how do they manage all those different NFTs that they've pre-minted or their collections? They also probably have treasuries, right? So if they're selling these things, they're building up treasuries of like USDC and Matic and ETH. And if you were a traditional business, if you were Vale or Mercado Libre or something in Brazil or whatever, GE in the US, when you have US dollars and euros, you usually do productive things with them, right? So like you buy T-bills or certificates of deposit. Well, you may want to like stake them or use like DeFi to have like a good treasury management strategy for those. You may also have these assets not from proceeds, but to subsidize gas. So we'll help you manage that. And then also just like the .com rush, there is a lot of like, you don't want, you know, some of these holding companies, if you think of like a Unilever or like a Pepsi, Frito-Lay, they own Pepsi, they own Frito-Lay, they own Dasani. They don't want people buying up all the ENS and like lens profiles for these names. So much as you would stockpile.coms, they're kind of protecting themselves there. So like those last two categories of MMI user, which is again, you know, I kind of want to push MMI here because it's a product, but I also want to give some insights to your customers about the industry at broad. I've been really pleased. As I've worked with MetaMask Institutional globally, we see these different type of customers in every country. But I would say in Brazil, we really see like a good uniform distribution across everything that I just named. So VCs, protocols, crypto native funds, hedge funds, and, you know, larger funds, as well as kind of like brands really doing cool digital collectible and loyalty stuff, and exchanges, banks, neobanks, fintechs creating really cool products. Brazil would probably be, I would say without comparison, easily top one, top two markets globally for folks really doing interesting institutional Web3 stuff. Because in some countries, there's a lot of institutions getting to Web3. It's like, okay, buy, sell, hold, ETH, Bitcoin. Okay, that's great. But, you know, Web3 is much bigger. And I think there's a certain parity between, there's an approaching parity between what you can do in Web3 and what at least Brazilian institutions are like attempting to do, which I find quite inspiring.
Yeah, I find the last example quite interesting. This is kind of a world I haven't really delved into much of you know, kind of domain name squatting, essentially. Like all of us that were, you know, we were too young to capture, you know, get in on the domain name, you know, the .com domain name rush back in the early 2000s. You know, people are going out and buying up, you know, trying to buy things on ENS and unstoppable domains and whatever. You know, I've already bought like, you know, domain names for all my kids and, you know, my cousins and everything, like,
Okay.
you know, all this kind of stuff. And yeah, like people are going to go out and try to be like, whoa, might as well, Petrobras is like sleep at the wheel. I'm going to go buy the, you know, the Petrobras.ens, you know, the Petrobras.eth like name or whatever. So it's interesting that you have companies getting in just almost taking like a protective stance in a sense, like, okay, if this thing does become big, we need to make sure that we have our kind of our IP covered. And then the NFT mints, I mean, you do have a few interesting experiments here in Brazil of brands that have been, I would argue, successfully have been rolling out some of these NFT kind of loyalty schemes. You know, it's like Reserva, the retailer. There's a few of these that have done, you know, they've been like, you know, I mean, I think some of the interesting NFTs petered off in the last year or so, but there's been quite a bit of successful examples of some of these. You know, I think Rock in Rio did like an NFT mint for some of their customers, NFT ticketing scheme. So there's some pretty interesting stuff happening on that front. And it's just kind of interesting, like, thinking through like what's the operational, what has to go into the operations of that behind the scenes to actually manage all these NFTs, and like, where are you going to keep them? Are you going to keep them in like, like some random guy's like MetaMask account? Or are you going to keep them in some place that's a little bit more, it's like, a crypto exchange with like one guy controlling, it's Gerald Cotton all over again, potentially, right? Where the one guy dies and runs off. Like, what are you going to do with all these NFTs, right?
Yeah, I can't say whom, but a few years ago, we had a museum come to us actually to use MMI because they were building up an NFT collection to kind of complement some of their physical and plastic and painting art. And they were like, yeah, we when the collection was 2 or 3 items, it was fine. We had the ledger, but now we're kind of freaked out about it. Like, can we please use MMI with one of your custodians? Because we have like 150 NFTs on this one ledger. We need to professionalize this. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, and I would like to get a bit more color on just from your vantage point here on the institutional side of things, like on the kind of the what we, I guess, in crypto language, when we talk about institutional investors, we're talking about kind of like VCs, hedge funds, family offices, that type of thing. And I think the perception in the Brazil market has been that the market, like crypto, has really been more of like a retail driven thing here, perhaps even more so than in other larger markets. But I think some of that's been changing over the last year or so, just given the legislation that was passed, and then we're going to have regulations incoming. And obviously the central bank is rolling out its digital real Drex system. So we're kind of rapidly, snowballing toward mainstream acceptance here. So we'd love to kind of get your view on how this has, how maybe like the perception around this asset class amongst, what in crypto we would call the institutions, quote unquote, has been shifting, just given your conversations with folks in the region.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Brazil is really a success case without almost parallel. I think there's been a thoughtful process over a number of years and an interaction between the likes of folks who work at protocols, folks who work at software companies like myself, financial institutions, wallet providers, et cetera, to really craft a really, thoughtful, comprehensive view to protect folks, but also enable innovation. And I think the fruits of it are, already very clearly indicated by some of the moves that we've seen. I think that Brazil already was a very pioneer nation. You mentioned that retail drove a lot of it, which is true, but I think there really has been, really interesting, I would say, support from a number of institutions. So whether it's the likes of like BTG, who I think has been very pioneering, both like from their crypto desk to like their launch of Mint to their BTG dollar and all the work that they've done as a systemically important bank, which is very unique, to really innovate in that space, but to do it responsibly and demonstrate that it can be done, as well as folks like, Mercado Bitcoin, T2M has been around forever. To see them get that grant from the Bacen to be a payment institution and participate independently was quite nice to see. I think, the entrance of others, the stuff that Nubank's done has been quite exciting. At least, if you're the fastest growing digital bank, having crypto offering really does serve to be an interesting on-ramp for new users. I mean, not on-ramp in the psychological on-ramp of, okay, now I'm a crypto user. We saw a lot of that with like the likes of like PayPal and Venmo and all that in the US in the past years, like 17, 18. So it is nice to see like a very trusted name, providing folks that kind of sandbox with which to kind of enter the space. And, so that's been ongoing even, before last December, this June, when things went into effect. But I would say that, with the clarity, the amount of conversations that I have with whether it's, funds have always had a little bit of the liberty to invest in Web3 and DeFi by incorporating in the Caribbean. But it is nice to just be able to walk to someone's office on Faria Lima and say hey, with an existing fund structure, we are now able to do this without creating a new entity in BVI or whatever. So it makes things a lot easier from an operational standpoint on the fund side. On the bank side, I mean, I'm just really, again, I can't salute enough folks like BTG and Nubank, and, Itaú's been really much in the space for a long time. We did many years ago, we created a tokenized carbon credit network with them and RBC, Consensys, RBC, Itaú, and another bank that's escaping me now. But, it's been really great to see them all. But I think since June, what we're really seeing is a very uniform entrance by a number of the Brazilian FIs. And I would say, due to the earlier innovations by a lot of these folks, it's a little bit more innovative than in some countries. Again, as folks enter Web3, as financial institutions enter Web3, that kind of means buy, sell, hold Bitcoin, ETH, maybe throw in another asset, right? I think it's been very exciting to see when I talk to Brazilian institutions, they are talking about, okay, cool, let's create a better remittance product. Let's give folks access to different Web3 protocols. Let's let folks participate in DeFi. Let's talk about staking. Let's look at, cool things we can do with like NFT loyalty programs. So it's not just like the breadth of institutions entering the space, but I think the breadth of things that they're trying to do with Web3 is one of the reasons that I am, endlessly excited for Brazil. And then, of course, totally outside of that at all, it remains for the folks that feel comfy using their own MetaMask wallet, particularly now that we've got Portfolio and Learn that makes it super easy. It is, Brazil has been one of our top 6, top 10, top 5 countries, top 3 countries over the past year. Changes, month to month. But it was I think our biggest contributor to MetaMask growth in 2021. So both on kind of the FI side and building a very structured kind of safe city walled garden place to play, as well as folks become true denizens of Web3. I can't think of a better market than Brazil in the entire world.
That's great color. Thank you. Appreciate that. And going back to the MetaMask retail side, Brazil, you mentioned Brazil's been one of the kind of the top 1, 2, 3 markets pretty consistently for the last couple of years. And I'm just wondering why you think that is. Obviously there's the population size. It's a big country, big population. But is there something unique about Brazilians that make that maybe they're more conducive, they're open to taking these risks to kind of get involved in these types of projects? And do you have any analytics on maybe obviously there's different phases of engagement with MetaMask, right? There's opening a wallet and putting some ETH in there, and then there's using all these tools more advanced and aping into kind of different projects, or doing swaps and bridging and staking, and there's a whole different there's a whole suite of different levels you can go to as far as your engagement with MetaMask goes. Is that something you're able to do you have any kind of color on how sort of sophisticated are the users of this product?
Yeah, certainly. So, generally, when we look at a country's adoption of Web3 stuff, there's usually traditionally kind of 3 metrics that kind of drive it, but I think there's now a 4th. And I think the 4th is really a differentiator for Brazil. The first 3 are kind of what is the unbanked and underbanked population like? And I think Brazil, for what it's worth, I think the banks, the private banks, the public banks, the central bank, all these different players have done a better job than a lot of places in Latin America. For the most part, Latin America, there's a McKinsey report on rent seeking that comes out every few years. Latin America does tend to have the most rent seeking banks. So it's when you just charge people for nothing, it's not even a real service. Brazil, I'm not throwing Brazil under the bus here. Brazil, if you look at our survey, people think the financial system in Brazil is pretty good. There's room for improvement, but that we see other countries where the results are way worse. But as long as there's room for improvement, there's always going to be room for democratizing things like Web3. So, we see in the US too, where there's endless options for banking and financial services. Folks do want things where they can do cheaper remittances, better savings, more exposure to other currencies. So the whole stablecoin revolution has been really big. Particularly I work a lot throughout Latin America, and I think times when folks saw the market as negative or whatever, a lot of Latin American folks I talk to what's negative? I own my stable coins. It's I'm doing good. I'm not it's 80% of my portfolio, so I don't really mind, because they're doing it for real world things, whether it's savings or remittance, etc. So there is that kind of thing about the underbanked and the unbanked, which is I think is a driver in Brazil, like it is everywhere. Maybe a little less than some of the surrounding countries in LATAM. There's also things around inflation. Inflation is everywhere. In Latin America, it's obviously top of mind. But I think in every country there have been instances of inflation. So folks, in the past few years at least, folks trying to find ways to mitigate that. And frankly, in Web3, it's a lot easier than having a multi-currency account with a broker. If you're not 100,000 or a millionaire or whatever, it's very hard to have access to these type of services. Whereas, me just as any person really could have a select series of maybe euro and US dollar stable coins, deploy them into DeFi, even ETH, ETH and Bitcoin or whatever, provide some protection depending on the market dynamics, et cetera. So that's another one. And then third is really how online people are. Are they extremely online? And Brazil, like the US, is an extremely online country. People love their social networks. They got, a lot of facility with both kind of laptops, smartphone penetration, et cetera. So, that's another part of that kind of mix that we see in those three countries, kind of underbanked, unbanked, inflation, high technical acuity and adoption. And the fourth I would add is that I think Brazil, as we do this transition into a lot of non-financial applications, has always been, a country where folks are, if you look at like Felipe Neto and these big, like famous, like YouTube streamers, if you look at like the Orkut back in the day, and then, Facebooky and all this stuff, the number of Twitter users, like Blue Sky, if you look at Blue Sky, initially, like all the users were in like the US or Brazil. I think it is a first adopter country. A, with all new technology, so that does help the Web3 instance. But then B, as people do search for like a better WhatsApp, a better Telegram, a better Facebook, a better Twitter. Obviously, I think, Web3 is a space where there can be a more democratized a better democratized service where you have some say in the future of the platform, where you receive some type of like compensation for your activity in a way that's very transparent. Obviously, YouTube and Twitch and them pay folks, but I think there could be much more easily auditable, understandable, compensation frameworks. And of course, Felipe Neto makes money from like YouTube. The average person who tweets does not get like a micropayment for each tweet that they do, that it gets a like, right? So like, I think there's a lot of space there in Brazil, being such a creative country, a place where there's so many great, like, music artists, actors. There's like a whole Hollywood system. You look at like the Porta dos Fundos folks that blew up just from doing YouTube because they were tired of writing for TV or whatever, and all the success they've had. I think supporting, with the Web 2 revolution that gave them that opportunity to all leave their jobs working for like Globo or whatever to have their own show, which then got picked up later, but they needed that space to do it on their own. I think Web 3 is going to really be a space for even more of that creativity. So, I think Brazil is just a perfect melting pot for all of that.
Yeah, I would agree. When I think of Brazilians, like the first word that always comes to mind is just savvy, right? Like if there's a way to like hack, if there's a clever hack to like engineer some sort of, kind of financial outcome that's in your favor, like they're going to find it in some fashion, whatever it may be. If it's, washing cars, or if it's, doing play to earn games, or using decentralized social media platforms that pay you for posting stuff, or whatever it might be, right? One last question for you, and then I'll turn it over just for some final thoughts, or if there's anything else you wanted to add. Just kind of looking at Brazil's kind of place globally, and I really would appreciate your vantage point on this, just because you operate in Brazil and you also have kind of a much more of a global vantage point as well, given your role with Consensys. And I mean, as we're speaking right now, kind of the focus of the crypto world is really in like Korea. There's a Korea blockchain week going on. Everyone's going to go to Token 2049 in Singapore. And it seems like all the energy is like really just focusing on Asia right now. And I think, and even to Hong Kong to some extent as well, which is also Asia, but I didn't mention it. And I guess the reason I started this platform 2 years ago, the Brazil Crypto Report, is I just felt like Brazil's just easily the most like overlooked market in the whole world. Like, how is nobody paying attention to this? It just seems crazy, right? People get all excited about like, oh, like some small country in Asia has like new crypto laws that might be friendly, and people are all excited about that. But like there's this massive market right here, right beneath you, that like you're just totally overlooking. And just kind of wondering, like, what's it going to take for like the industry to like really start like recognizing Brazil as like giving it the credit that it deserves, essentially, as being this market that we should be like really investing in and paying more attention to?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. I mean, I hope it happens tomorrow. I hope people get smart about Brazil and Latin America broadly. So, I mean, Brazil is certainly a leader, but if you look at countries like, we did the survey also for Argentina and Mexico, because there are large concentrations of MetaMask users there. And then, I mean, some countries are small. I mean, Uruguay has like 3 million people. It's like the size of Philadelphia, but like the crypto adoption there is very high, right? Now, even if 100% adopt, it's only 3 million people or whatever, but it's still a lot. We see the same dynamics in Chile, Peru. Dominican Republic is a huge crypto country. I think I live in New York. It's a very Dominican city. I think some of the interplay between New York going back and forth has maybe contributed that, but Dominican Republic is a super leader too. So I do want to say the entire continent, I have a lot of time for, a lot of hope in. Brazil particularly, though, I mean, again, previous to working at Consensys or even in Web3, I've been working in Brazil since I had a Nota Fiscal job when that launched. I was helping integrate when companies first had to do their integration with the Cefaz to report their Notas Fiscais. So, I've always been in love with this market, just super innovative, super smart people. I would hope that, folks really do start to perceive the size, right? Was it 200 something million folks, 215, 16 or something, 230? Don't quote me on this. But then also the penetration of this and really the breadth of activity that's going on. You do see that a little bit. I think SoftBank did a big investment into 2TM. Coinbase was looking at it as an acquisition target. Bitso's originally Mexican, but they moved into Brazil. We obviously are a global company, but we're very dedicated to Brazil. So you do see it from a number of folks. I would hope that it would continue. I think the developments in the standardization and the comprehensibility of the regulatory framework are really going to contribute a lot, where folks do kind of innovation, both in the way that people immediately see in like the retail world, but there'll be a bunch of stuff behind the scenes and like pure financial work too, like just working on delivery versus payment of securities, stuff that I'm sure B3 and XP and all of them are working on around tokenized securities or tokenized commodities is really, I think, going to be a benchmark for a lot of the world. Because in a lot of countries, if you look at like a network like Linea or something like that, banks are like, forget like a product for retail customers, just behind the scenes, back office kind of processing. There's already a lot of space to innovate there, but they need that regulatory kind of like clarity to really start building those products. And it's not about endangering retail people. Retail people wouldn't even know. It's a back office kind of software innovation that like has been ready to happen for years and hasn't happened yet. And I think in Brazil, they're in a space to make that happen, at least with the Brazilian banking community. But then also, whether people ignore Brazil or not, I think there's a lot of like, what's it called? Like endogenous activity in Brazil. You can ignore Brazil. It's still going to grow. It's 200 something million really smart, creative people. And I think that's kind of been the case for the past, X amount of years. I would love it if more US folks or Canadians or French people thought about investing or creating localization services for Brazilians. We are certainly, pushing a lot of our stuff in Portuguese. Eu falo português. We've probably 15. We probably have 50 people in Consensys who speak Portuguese. So we take it super seriously. But all that said, again, the rest of the world could ignore Brazil. I think 2 years from now, it would still be a much larger, more sophisticated, intelligent, exciting, dynamic market, just because of the strength of the people and, how exciting the ecosystem there is.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like Brazil's it's just gonna keep doing its own thing, irrespective of what the rest of the world thinks. Essentially, right? It's kind of proven that throughout history that it's its own, has the freedom to be its own sort of entity, and just it's going to do what it's going to do. I guess that concludes my questions. But if you had any other final thoughts or anything else you wanted to add that you wanted folks to know, I'll turn the mic over to you. And also, how should folks get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, surely. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I quit Twitter. I have Twitter. I just read it now. I don't post anymore. I'm trying to be productive at work. LinkedIn, feel free to hit me up. You can also contact for any of our business lines for Metamask Institutional, which super interested in promoting that in Brazil. If anyone just goes to the site and requests a meeting, we will do it to you. We will schedule one that day, the next day. Super pumped to talk to people about that. For Linea, if you go to linea.build, we're really excited about getting adoption of this new exciting type 2 fully EVM equivalent layer 2 out there. Really, we're super responsive here at Consensys. Feel free to hit up the website, ask us about Snaps, Metamask Institutional, or Linea. And I'll be back in the market probably 3 or 4 times this year. I probably have a Florianopolis, Sao Paulo, and Rio trip I've got to get out of the way before. I've already been to Brazil like 3 times this year. I'm super pumped. Always about the market. I said, even if folks ignore Brazil or whatever, it's going to keep growing. I'm not going to. I'll be there. So really pleased. Always to chat with folks and just thanks so much again for the chance to speak today.
Amazing. Well, Daniel, thanks so much for your time. It's great having you on the show here, and thanks everyone for listening. And we will be back soon with another great episode.
Awesome. Have a great day.